Hey everybody, today I want to talk about an album by Bob Dylan called Bringing It All Back Home. I just listed this pressing on my website, neilmeetsvinyl.com. And this is an amazing pressing of Bob Dylan's 1965 album. Now, this is the album that really was a major breakthrough for Bob Dylan. This is the first album that he went electric on. Now, of course, famously, he played the Newport Folk Festival in 1965, and he showed up with a blues backing band with Mike Bloomfield playing guitar from the Paul Butterfield Blues Band. And Bob showed up with a Fender Stratocaster, and he played an electric set, and it just blew all the folkies away, and they were all freaked out because their iconic folk hero was now going electric and playing blues, rock and roll, and it was just a whole big scene, right? Well, before that concert, Bob released this album, and this was really the first instance of Bob going electric. Side one of this album has, every single song has a backing band playing with him. And all the songs, by the way, are amazing. So this is just a major album of the 1960s and a major album for Bob Dylan as well. And a personal side note, this is the very first Bob Dylan album that I ever bought. Speaking of Bob, here's Bob the cat, by the way, who is named after Bob the poet. But this is the first album that I ever bought of Bob's, and I just completely was obsessed with it for, well, I still am, but for about a year and a half when I first bought it, I listened to this over and over and over again and just loved every single aspect of it. It really got me hooked on to Bob, and it got me into his other albums like Blonde on Blonde and Highway 61 Revisited, and then of course his later work like Blood on the Tracks and Desire and just all the Bob stuff. So now, because of this album, I became absolutely a Bob Dylan fanatic. Now let's talk about this particular pressing. So this is stereo pressing. This album was released in 1965, but this pressing that I have on the website is a pressing from 1969, and it is on the Columbia label, the Columbia 360 label, and this is in absolutely near mint condition. And here comes Bob the cat again. He wants to see what's happening. By the way, Bob the cat really does like Bob Dylan. Every time I put on Bob Dylan, Bob the cat will come wherever I'm listening to it, whatever room I'm in. He'll come and like lay on the floor and just sit there, and it seems like he's listening to it while I'm listening to it. So, a little interesting side note about Bob the cat. Anyway, back to Bob the singer. So, this album, like I said, it's a 1969 pressing on the Columbia 360 label, and it's in near mint condition. Absolutely a beautiful pressing, and it sounds unbelievable. Now, sometimes with Bob's albums from the 60s, they can be a little bit thin sounding. There are certain pressings that they don't really do the songs all that much justice. This one, thankfully, is not like that at all. It has a lot of low end, and the high end has a brilliant clarity to it. So it's not shrill, it's not thin, it's got a lot of warmth. And that is so important when it comes to Bob Dylan. I think a lot of people get turned off by Bob because he has a kind of an unconventional voice. I think, but also the other reason is because sometimes the pressings or the recordings can sound a little bit shrill and thin, and that can get grating after a while. This is not that way at all. This is about as warm and beautiful and full of that analog sound that you can really get. It's so fantastic. Now, I went through a bunch of different pressings of this album. And in fact, over the last year and a half, I've been picking up as many as I could. And this 1969 pressing beat all those out for a number of reasons. First and foremost, this is in absolutely near mint condition. Finding original 60s pressings of this album in good condition, very difficult. And on top of that, there are certain stamper numbers from the 60s that don't sound very good at all. They weren't pressed very well. And luckily, this is not one of those. So this is from 1969. It sounds brilliant, and it's the stereo pressing. Now, there was also a mono pressing, and I have a copy of that over here from my own collection. But I personally prefer the stereo mix over the mono mix, just because you get more I just believe it sounds overall better. The sonic quality is a little bit better than the mono mix. The mono mix can be a little bit shrill, like I was talking about. The mono mix is still worth owning at some point, but I think really if you had to pick either the mono or stereo, I would choose the stereo. Now, like I said, I went through other pressings of this, and I'm sure a lot of you are wondering about this pressing. Now, this, by the way, is from my personal collection. This used to belong to a library. That's why it's got some weird stickers on here, like ask for record at front desk, and then someone tore off the other sticker that was right here. So the cover's in kind of bad shape, but the actual record's in very nice shape. Now, this is a very common pressing of this album, and it's on a later Columbia label. This is on the Columbia, I call it the red and the orange label. It's got a red label with Columbia written in orange going all around there. Now, this is a very, very common pressing. You can still find these in your record shops all the time. I personally don't like this pressing all that much. When it comes to Bob Dylan, I feel like a lot of people experience him, if they're going to listen to him on vinyl, with a lot of these pressings, and that is really not a good way to go, in my opinion. Granted, if you find one of these, it's worth picking up because Bob is Bob and he's great, and you can get these for pretty cheap. But finding original 1960s pressings, like I just showed you, on the solid red Columbia label with the white writing, those are the harder ones to find, and those are the ones that sound so much better. If you compare this one to the one that I have on the website, it is almost like night and day. It really, there's just so much more of a richness about the overall sound, and it just has that magic. So if you find these pressings out in the wild, if you can get them for a cheap price, they're worth picking up. But really, I don't love them all that much. And that goes, by the way, for a lot of the Bob's albums from the 60s that were re-released on this label. Now, that being said, there are some Bob later albums that are released on this label that sound great. And some of those include like Blood on the Tracks, Desire, a whole bunch of other ones. They sound excellent. So, and I will show you this mono pressing just because I have it out here, and I might as well show it to you. Now, it's in its own sleeve in there. This is the mono. And like I said, here's side 2. It has its own mix, and it's a very interesting listening experience. Here's Bob. Bob is so attracted to Bob Dylan. I don't know what it is. Are you going to stand right in front of the camera, Bob? He might do it. Oh, no, he's going the other way. Anyway, so the mono mix, it's worth owning for sure because you can hear some different stuff going on in here, but it's not all that different to the stereo mix. But as far as the sonic attributes of it, it's a little bit more of a thin sound, in my opinion, and it just it seems to be just lacking a little bit of something that the stereo pressings really have that are so beautiful. So, by the way, I should mention some of the songs on this album. I probably should have done that earlier, but I'll do it now. This album has some of Bob's most classic songs. The first song on side 1 is Subterranean Homesick Blues, which of course is just an amazing song, full of just brilliant one-liners throughout the whole song. Like, you don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows. Don't follow leaders, watch the parking meters. Has all kinds of great lyrics. By the way, obviously, throughout the whole album, there are just brilliant lyrics. This album also has Mr. Tambourine Man on side 2, which is just a brilliant song. It also has It's All Over Now, Baby Blue on side 2. And It's All Right, Ma, I'm Only Bleeding, which is another amazing lyrical song. And on side 1, of course, it has some great kind of blues rockers like Maggie's Farm, Outlaw Blues. It also has some really brilliant Bob acoustic kind of love songs. A song called She Belongs to Me, which is maybe one of the best love songs ever written. Also a song called Love Minus Zero, No Limit, which might be my favorite song on this whole album. It's just full of brilliant Bob Dylan songs. So, if you are interested in picking up this very pressing of Bob Dylan's Bringing It All Back Home from 1965, and this happens to be a 1969 pressing. Go to my website, needlemeetsvinyl.com. You can check this one out. I did a whole write-up on this album with a big back history as to how it was recorded and the whole vibe of the times, and you can check that out on my website. So check this one out. Check out all the records on the website because there are plenty on there. I have been posting a bunch this week, and I will continue to do so. And of course, stay tuned because there will be some Beatle records coming up this weekend, probably, if not next week. I also have a really pristine Mamas and Papas album that I will be posting to the website probably tomorrow. So stay tuned for all of that. And hey, bye for now.